Hi, this is Krishna Prasad. I am an Associate Professor of Psychiatry.
So now I request Professor Pratima Murthy to formally welcome the gathering. I see the gathering to be very, very varied and from all parts of the country. Ma'am.
Thank you, Naveen. Welcome to all of you who are gathered here today on the eve of the Suicide Prevention Day, which is tomorrow. And so we have organized this webinar on the occasion of the Suicidal Prevention Day. And I take this opportunity to welcome all of you. We have with us the director of NIMHANS, Professor B.N. Gangadhar, who is also a psychiatrist by training. We have Professor Shekhar, the registrar, who is a faculty in the Department of Psychiatric Social Work, Dr. Satish Giramaji, the dean, and a professor in child psychiatry, senior professor in child psychiatry, Dr. Shekhar Sheshadri, the assistant dean, as well as the professor in child psychiatry. We have a large number of faculty here from various disciplines. As you know, NIMHANS is a multidisciplinary team. So we have a multidisciplinary team here. So we have several people from different departments. And most importantly, on the other side, we have virtually more than 200 sites logged in from different parts of the country. I know that we have a very heterogeneous group consisting of mental health professionals. We have representatives from the police. We have representatives from the media and from civil society organizations. So I welcome you all to this very, very important discussion on suicide prevention. And this is kind of slotted between tomorrow, which is a day for suicide prevention, and the World Mental Health Day in October, where the theme is also the same. Just to kind of give you the idea of what we are dealing with, it's a very grim situation because every hour a young life gets snuffed out because of suicide. It's been described as a very complex public health tragedy. There are more suicide deaths in India than AIDS-related deaths and maternal deaths combined. And of course, even though India has only about 17.8% of the global population, we account for a much larger proportion of suicides among both women as well as men. Recently, a couple of years ago, NIMHANS carried out the National Mental Health Survey in 12 states in the country, and there we found that suicide was an important cause for mortality in many of the states. In the next slide, you'll see that when you look at the picture in India, when you look at the picture in the whole of the country, you'll see that in many, many states, the rates of suicide are extremely high. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, you'll see that the rates of suicide are extremely high. The states marked in red indicate high levels of suicide compared to the others. So it's a kind of pan-national phenomenon that we need to address. In the next slide, we need to talk about responses, and that brings us to the theme today, the World Suicide Prevention Day, working together to prevent suicide. There are many, many players who are going to be involved in this, not just mental health professionals, but larger civil society as well. And there are several things that we need to do. And finally, it's about choosing life and living life well. I welcome you all once again, and I hope you have a very enjoyable afternoon, really looking at strategies for the prevention of suicide.
Thank you, madam. Now it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Satish Chandra Giramaji, Senior Professor, Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Dean Behavioral Sciences, for the inaugural.
Thank you, Naveen. I just make a few comments before presidential address. Suicide is not an individual phenomenon. It's not something which affects a single person. Suicide rates, for example, reflect the health and well-being of the society as a whole. So that being the case, suicide prevention has to be the concern of everyone. And in the process, we would be enhancing the well-being of the society as a whole. Such prevention of suicide is possible by a broad set of measures and initiatives and actions directed at different levels. This may be in the form of public education, gatekeeper training, means restriction, helpline and internet support, media education, screening, detection and intervention for mental health problems, especially depression, and suicidality, and many more such approaches. Evidence is building up that these approaches do work. So we need to take much more active interest in this whole process of suicide prevention. And in today's panel, we'll be sharing whatever NIMHANS has been doing in this area over the years, and the directions that have been taken by the NIMHANS. And as you can see during the panel discussion, these have a kind of a pan-national flavor. So I welcome you all again for this and seek your active participation during the discussion time. Thank you, and I hand it over to Dr. Gangadhar.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. B.N. Gangadhar to speak about pan-India initiatives by NIMHANS taken on suicide prevention. Directly.
NIMHANS has been in the forefront in terms of reducing suicide risk and helping suicide prevention. Very recently, we were invited to the Sikkim state, where suicide rates have been found to be alarmingly high. We have already made a memorandum of understanding to work with the health professionals and many other mental health professionals as well. Train them, make them become aware. When I'm saying becoming aware, I want you to keep in mind, in the recent National Mental Health Survey, we found for every person who completes suicide, we have 200 people who would have harbored the ideas of suicide. And it is this target population which should be addressed. Whoever talks about suicide, whoever mentions about suicide, if these people can be addressed and they can be helped, the risk of completing the suicide would be much, much lower. So keeping this in mind, literally all people who either make an attempt or complete the suicide would have expressed their suicidal intentions earlier. And here it is, we intend to locate such people, train various stakeholders to be able to identify such individuals and develop some skills to be able to counsel them or at least identify severe disorders in them and to bring them to appropriate help. So this, what we have initiated at Sikkim, we are already been requested by several other states, and we have been doing national human resource development in the mental health scenario as it is, using digital technology. We did it in a couple of states like Bihar, Chhattisgarh. We have expanded it to now Gujarat, and more states we are going to be expanding this into. In all these places, close to almost 3,000 people have been trained at different mental health paradigms. This technology we intend to use all over the country in all our mental health human resource development, with an emphasis on suicide prevention. Even this suicide prevention day that is going to happen tomorrow. In addition, this year's mental health day also has the major theme of suicide prevention. So for a month-long activities at NIMHANS on various departments to help people become aware and prevent suicide. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We come to the next item in our program, that is the experience of end users, namely the gatekeepers, beneficiaries, and survivors. So for this, we have prepared a video clipping, maybe about. So this video clipping will, tell us about various experiences of the end users. Yes.
I work as a nursing officer in charge at NIMHANS NPO. We initiated the clinic in suicide prevention in the year 2013, and it's an ongoing program. We conducted every month, and the frequency of conducting the programs also have been increased. And the learning objectives for this program would be like identifying the people at risk for suicide, assessing the risk for suicide, and immediate intervention for suicide, and signposting and resource mobilization. Using this current methodology, we have trained more than 3,000 gatekeepers in the community, and it is a one-day program where we train mostly based on the skills. And I wish to show the video clips of.
I work in a school setup, and instances of self-harm and suicidal ideation, which is very common nowadays. I think this is a very serious concern, especially among teachers and parents. Gatekeepers training for suicide prevention has enabled me to handle such instances with greater confidence. Thanks to NIMHANS for coming out with such a beautiful program which helps the layman counselors and even teacher counselors in a school setup. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Shubha Jayaprakash, a certified counselor and a volunteer with NIMHANS, Spandana and a few NGOs. Last year I attended this gatekeepers training on suicide prevention conducted by Mrs. Padma. Actually, this is of a great help to me. And through this session, I have learned what is the role of a gatekeeper in the society and how to identify the risk factors and warning signs, how to assess the risk, and also what type of questions to be asked. If the risk is too much, how to handle such case, how and when to refer, and timely intervention. All these things I have learned in this session through role plays and group discussions. And since last year, I am able to save 3 lives, after which one girl was highly suicidal and she had tried 4 to 5 times. Due to timely intervention, I was able to save her life. Later, I refer the case to NCWB, and now she is under treatment and she is doing fine. So I thank Padma and also this session for helping me in this case. Thank you.
Inspector of Police and Wellbeing Officer of Coimbatore City. While conducting the wellbeing program, one AR head constable has shared the difficulties being faced by him during one beautiful personal experience sharing session. I could understand his emotional turbulence, and started supporting him by giving some personal counseling. And also I spoke to his wife over phone thrice, and I was in constant contact with him over phone, and I was following him repeatedly. All of a sudden, on 6/8/2019 at 10 p.m., I have received a WhatsApp message from the AR constable that he wants to speak to me when I am free. So immediately I called him, but his number was switched off. His number was not reachable for more than 15 minutes, and his WhatsApp status turned into sleeping. So I tried his number continuously. As I couldn't reach him, I felt something bad, and believing my intuition, I directed another AR authorities and line only to speak to me after reaching the AR constable's residence. Hence, I also proceeded to his residence. And by the time the AR team entered his house, just within a matter of 2 minutes, his life was saved.
எனக்கு இந்த வாழ்க்கை கொடுத்தது வந்து எனக்கு கேட்டால் எங்கள் மேடம், அதுக்கடுத்து நம்ம வெல்பிங் கிளாஸ்ன்னு தான் சொல்லுவேன். ஏன்னா நான் எப்படியோ போக வேண்டியவன். எனக்குன்னு ஒரு வாழ்க்கையை அமைச்சு கொடுத்தாங்க. எல்லா பிரச்சனையும் எனக்கு தீர்த்து வச்சாங்க. கேன்சருக்கு கூட பிஜி வரைக்கும் பேசி ஏற்பாடு பண்ணி கொடுத்தாங்க. இன்றைக்கி என் ஃபேமிலியோட சந்தோஷமாக இருக்கிறேன், இன்னும் வாழ்ந்துட்டுருக்கேன் அப்படின்னாது நம்ம போலீஸ் வெல்பிங் கிளாஸும் எங்கள் மேடம் மட்டும்தான். ஸோ போலீஸ் வெல்பிங் கிளாஸுக்கும் எங்கள் மேடத்துக்கும் நன்றின்னு சொல்ல முடியாது. வாழ்க்கை சாகிற வரைக்கும் மறக்க மாட்டேன் நீங்கள் பண்ண உதவியை. எல்லோரும் என்னை பார்த்து தெரிஞ்சுங்க. ஏன்னா நான் எடுத்த எந்த ஒரு தப்பான முடிவும் தயவு செஞ்சு யாரும் எடுக்க வேணாம். எல்லாருக்கும் ஃபேமிலி இருக்குது, குழந்தைங்க இருக்குது. அதுக்கும் மேலே உங்களை நீங்கள் பார்த்துக்கிறணும். நீங்கள் நல்லா இருந்தால் தான் உங்கள் ஃபேமிலியை வந்து பார்த்துக்க முடியும். ஸோ எதுனாலும் நம்ம வெல்பிங் கிளாஸ் ஆஃபீஸர்கிட்ட நீங்கள் பேசலாம். அவங்க கண்டிப்பாக கட்டாயம் உங்களுக்கு வந்து ஒரு கார்டியனாக இருப்பாங்க. உங்கள் பிரச்சனையை பேசுகிறதுக்கு சொல்கிறதுக்கு யாரும் இல்லை நினைக்காதீங்க. உங்கள் வெல்பிங் கிளாஸ் ஆஃபீஸர்கிட்ட நீங்கள் பேசலாம். அவங்க உங்களுக்கு என்ன உதவினாலும் பண்ணுவாங்க. எனக்கு பண்ணியிருக்காங்க, அதே மாதிரி உங்களுக்கும் பண்ணுவாங்க.
இந்த வெல்பீயிங் கிளாஸ் அட்டன் பண்ணப்போ நான் ரொம்ப ஹாப்பியாக ஃபீல் பண்ணேன். அந்த பிரச்சனையால் நான் சூசைட் பண்ணிக்கிற அளவுக்கு போயிட்டேன். சூசைட் பப்ளிக் யாருக்கும் தெரியாத நான் போலீஸுங்கிறது என்னை சேவ் பண்ணாங்க. அதில் எங்கள் வெல்பீயிங் கிளாஸில் இருந்த ஸ்டாஃப்ஸுங்க வந்து என்னை மீட்டதோட உடனே எங்கள் டிஸ்ட்ரிக்ட் எஸ்பி மேடம் மதுரையில் இருக்கிற ராமசுப்ரமணியன் டாக்டர்கிட்ட என்னை அனுப்பி வச்சாங்க. அனுப்பி வச்சு என்னை ஃபாலோ பண்ணிகிட்டே இருந்தாங்க. எனக்கான சிகிச்சையை வந்து ஃபாலோ பண்ணிக்கிட்டே இருந்தாங்க. அதில் நான் மீண்டு வந்ததோட இப்போ வரைக்கும் என்ன பார்த்துட்டு தான் ஃபாலோ பண்ணிட்டு தான் இருக்காங்க.
So the gatekeepers can be anybody who is willing to give their time and energy for the cause of suicide prevention. It can be teachers, it can be students, it can be lay counselors, it can be public, it can be community leaders, it can be administrators of schools or colleges, anyone who wish to give their time and energy for the cause of suicide prevention. Thank you.
That we have unmuted all participants because to avoid the noise, from everywhere. So, but please don't get disheartened. If any questions are there, please raise your hands. We will be tracking that. We'll be noting down your questions. This is raising the hands after the panel discussion. So during the panel discussion, if there is any question, please make use of the chat function. We are tracking them, and finally we'll be able to answer most of the questions. So before starting. The panel discussion will be moderated by Professor Shekhar Seshadri, and the panelists are Dr. John Vijayasagar, Dr. Manjula, Dr. Jayakumar, Dr. Meena, Dr. Prashanti Natala, and Dr. Sandil Reddy. Now over to you, sir.
A very good afternoon to all of you. This is an exceedingly significant occasion for the reason that Dr. Pratima Murthy mentioned. 10th September is the World Suicide Prevention Day, and this year's World Mental Health Day theme also happens to be working together to prevent suicide. And we have therefore decided to spend this month in thinking deeply about this problem. The problem of suicide is not restricted to some random and stray incidents that are reported in the newspaper. As Dr. Giramaji pointed out, it is a major public health problem and one of the major indices from mental health that is included in the public health domain. Another thing we need to keep in mind is that between a person who says my situation is stressful, to someone who says my situation is intolerable, to someone who says I do not wish to live, and someone who says I wish to die, and someone who says I wish to kill myself are not similar where they are positioned phenomenologically in the process towards suicidality. And it is this distinction that we need to keep in mind as we think of prevention and working towards the whole aspect of prevention. Dr. Pratima mentioned about the National Mental Health Survey. Let us first examine what the burden of suicide actually is, and let me invite Sendil Kumar Reddy to enlighten us on what exactly the burden of suicide is.
Thank you so much, sir, for that. As has been pointed out earlier by Dr. Pratima, Professor Gangadhar, our director, as well as Dr. Shekhar, the burden in the country is tremendous and compared to the world. India is actually the largest contributor of suicides for the rest of the world. And this is not, this is something that has been emerging, and more recent information actually suggests that this is very worrying because 1 out of every 3 women and 1 out of every 4 men are, from India, the people who are committing suicide from across the whole world in total numbers. The other concerning aspect is that this is a very complex and multifactorial issue, and even the National Mental Health Survey that was conducted by India. Can speak? Yeah. Sorry, if you can't hear me, please. I do apologize. So even the National Mental Health Survey that was conducted by NIMHANS in 2014-15. What it actually showed is that approximately 1% of people, of all surveyed approximately 40,000 people, they were at high suicidal risk, or they were reporting high suicidality when at the time of the interview or the preceding 1 month. That's approximately 70 lakh to 1 crore people at a time who were at a high risk. And close to 7% reported some level of suicidal thinking in the last 1 month, which amounts to 7 crores. And that's very staggering and worrisome numbers. Because of its complex multifactorial nature, it's not something that is something that can be attended to directly by health or mental health professionals alone, and hence the idea of providing supports and interventions through an empowered community would be the only way to address this huge public health problem that exists as of today in India.
Well, as Sendil has pointed out, the numbers are mind-boggling. I draw your attention to a point that Dr. Girimaji made in his opening remarks when he said it is not merely an individual tragedy, it is a collective tragedy and one that impacts on the community. And since Sendil has raised the issue of a community focus to prevention, and if you look at immediate, intermediate, and distal approaches to how preventive and promotive programs can be organized, particularly where vulnerable populations are concerned. While suicide is a tragedy for most human beings, young suicides are that much more of a poignant tragedy for the family in concern. Let me invite John Vijaysagar from Child Psychiatry to really speak to us about what community approaches are possible to address vulnerability in young populations.
In terms of the community approaches to address the suicide prevention, as Professor Seshadri was rightly mentioning, the three levels, the immediate, intermediate, as well as the distal levels, we need to focus. Mainly in terms of, in the immediate level, if we can see people who present with crisis kind of situations, they require immediate kind of psychological support. And that is something we have to train the relevant stakeholders. And again, going back to the point which Professor Seshadri sir had made, that it has to be at the early level and focusing on youngsters who have this kind of vulnerability, and mainly targeting the parents as well as the teachers to handle the crisis situation, and also people at the school level, it could be school counselors and other relevant staff. And in terms of the intermediate kind of strategies, we need to look at some of the relevant stressors that happen across the age groups, and mainly in people, young people, both adolescents as well as young adults. What we see is the factors such as academic stress or failure in examinations, a loss kind of experience, especially the relationship loss kind of experience, or interpersonal issues with the family members. These are found to be the major kind of stressors, and they require immediate attention. And also, we see that due to these stressors, many of the persons, they are affected with common mental health issues, and they need early identification and also management. And the distal level, what we find is that many of these persons who either have death wishes or suicidal ideations or a suicidal attempt, and eventually they complete suicide, they actually have a lot of vulnerabilities right from the beginning, and mainly in terms of poor coping skills, poor emotional regulation, poor problem solving skills, and related life skills. And we can address it at that level, and from an early age we can start the life skills education, and also to address some of the issues like the interpersonal relationships right from the family level, like improving the parent-child relationships, etc.
John has raised a very important issue, which is that the context of suicidal behaviors lies in two domains. One is the domain of mental illness, and the other is in the domain of life events and stress. If you look at this distinction and look at the whole premise of preventive and promotive programs, and John has introduced what could be possible in young people, let's examine prevention and promotion a little more in depth. And let me invite Dr. Manjula, who is a professor from the Department of Psychology, to speak to us about some aspects of prevention and promotion that form the scaffolding and the framework on the basis of which she and other members of her department have been working on the whole prevention issue.
Thank you, sir. The prevention of suicides is only possible when there is increase in the awareness as well as there is engagement of the stakeholders. So the goals of the prevention and promotion of suicides is to increase the awareness, increase the importance of mental health, as well as the engagement of the stakeholders and the help seeking behaviors and help facilitation behaviors. As a first step in this direction, what we do in the department is we have created a research hub looking at the depression, suicidal behaviors and non-suicidal self-injurious behaviors. So specifically looking at, like Dr. John suggested, the vulnerability factors, the protective factors, and the specific training needs of different stakeholders. So this information has given us the knowledge of what is required for these populations, and we have developed a number of modules for training as well as the manuals. So the faculties carry out a number of activities addressing the awareness as well as the workshops and the training of trainers programs in this direction.
Thank you very much, Manjula. That brings us to a very important issue, the whole concept of vulnerability. While we speak about young people on the one hand and issues like depression on the other, we also know that suicidal risk is fairly high in certain professions. We certainly know about it in the medical profession. But NIMHANS recently has been engaged in a very wide program of engagement with the police system. And let me invite Jaykumar from social work to speak about stress and well-being in the police force and their families, and how this forms a context of the kind of preventive programs that you can organize in specific constituencies and specific populations.
Thank you, sir. As we all are aware that stress affects everyone. It touches everyone. And police profession is one of the most stressful professions when compared to others, because this is the only profession where the time restrictions, there is no routine is actually being followed, especially in an Indian context, because various reasons actually that they are actually overstretched. And as we are aware, that stress actually affects not only the individual, it affects various domains of an individual and his family. And actually, ultimately, there is actually an imbalance in personal and professional life of the person. And to address this issue, a unique initiative by NIMHANS, along with the Tamil Nadu Police Department, initiated to address these issues of stress among the police and the family members, because it has a direct correlation with the family also, was initiated. This entire program is actually looking at 1,25,000 population of personnel and 3,75,000 family members, holistically looking at personal and professional and relation and occupational domains of stress. And this initiative has been taken, and we follow a cascading set of a module where we don't directly go and actually intervene in any of these situations. Rather than we empower them to actually take up these issues at the ground level. Example, many of them are actually trained as 462 people from the police department were trained as well-being officers, and in turn, they actually conduct the capacity building at the ground level, covering each and every police personnel and the family members. Our objective is to reach the unreached, and the last mile connectivity is maintained in this program. So looking at actually the professional, personal, occupational relationship, and also the children and other family related issues also handled in this program. And in that sense, we also have a special assistance program where we identify people with high distress, people who are actually chronically ill, people who are actually into addiction issues, and people who are actually have a disciplinary issues, and we train them, we assess them, and those who are actually in need of a professional help are actually referred and followed up, and the care is being actually provided. And this special assistant program is being implemented all over Tamil Nadu, and this is the status of the police well-being.
Thank you very much. It brings us to this whole issue of who will deliver these prevention and promotion programs. And since you mentioned police professionals who are the peers of those in the police force who are affected either by life circumstances or by mental illness, it brings me to two other ways in which prevention programs are approached. Let me invite Prashanti from the Department of Nursing first to speak about the role of nurses in conducting these kind of programs, and that will be followed by Meena, who will speak about a peer approach in the whole prevention domain. Prashanti?
Thank you, sir. When it comes to the role of nurses in suicide prevention, a key point that comes to my mind is that nurses are available to individuals and family members 24/7, which makes them key members of the healthcare team to whom people often disclose important information about their physical and mental health. And this includes suicidal intent. Nurses, alongside other healthcare professionals, they work in a variety of settings, be it emergency, casualty, and other high priority areas, inpatient, outpatient, and out there in the community. They work along with other members of the healthcare team in identifying suicidal risk and often combining medical and behavioral interventions in working towards suicidal prevention. Conducting programs to ensure or taking steps to ensure individuals' safety and counseling them, offering practical advice on the spot about adopting a proper approach to dealing with their life issues and coordinating important information among the health team members are some of the roles that they play.
Thank you very much, Prashanti. Meena, what about a peer approach?
Thank you, sir, for raising this very important question. And when we look at the Enhanced Mental Health Survey in 2016, one of the glaring results that it showed was that there is a strong, there's a lack of treatment. That is, the treatment gap was very evident that, many people didn't have access to basic mental health care. And when Dr. John was talking about bringing children at a very young age, or the young adults or teenagers, I think they can play a very important role, and they are considered as one of the key. They could be considered as one of the key stakeholders in taking up programs, especially targeting in the area of suicide prevention. So there's a very strong need to develop a contextually sensitive, peer-led, strength-building suicide prevention programs in a very resource-limited setting like our country, where the peer leaders can play a very important role in identifying their friends who are at risk for suicide, because they're the first point of contact where actually it would not be the parents or the teachers, but the friends would be their first contact in telling about how they are feeling, or if they have they're harboring any suicidal ideations. So I think it's very important to look at contextually sensitive peer-led suicide programs, and if these could be replicated, we are looking at it from a research perspective to see its efficacy, and we are getting some positive results initially. But I think it would be very nice if this could be replicated, and we can imagine the large group of students that we can reach out, and the ripple effect that we'll have all over the country if the peer leaders are targeted for suicide prevention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the second part of the panel, and I'll start with Senthil again. Senthil, can you take us very quickly through the resource and capacity building exercises that can be attempted? For example, the work that is being done in Sikkim, which the director referred to, or the SPAN initiative. If you could quickly take us through these initiatives.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, sir. The Sikkim program for suicide prevention, and it's actually called the Suicide Prevention Action Network, was something that was a joint collaborative work that is underway with the state of Sikkim, and that's the government of Sikkim that is working together with us. And what we're trying to do is set up and scale up services that exist there, train personnel from various backgrounds, not just a healthcare service, but also from the education department, media personnel, the police, etc. And sensitize as well as train a lot of these people in looking at how to identify someone who might be vulnerable, how to approach them, inquire, and encourage them and support them to seek help in a way that would be beneficial and prevent suicide. Now, Sikkim is something that's affected in one of the states with the highest rates of suicide. So we have looked to start, have already started that. We've already also done work with the district mental health teams from several states. So we're collaborating with Chhattisgarh, as part of the district mental health program, the state of Karnataka and Maharashtra as well. There are other states in the pipeline, several other 4 or 5 states. What has been highlighted by other panelists, and I would like to reinforce that although the burden of suicide is immense in India, what is also important to understand is that its prevention and intervention is something that can be provided through a variety of people within the community. So it's about actually scaling up the skill sets of members of the community. This has been running through the Gatekeeper training program that's already been mentioned at NIMHANS, and a couple of thousand people have been trained from various backgrounds. We've also trained people from the prison staff, colleges and college students and staff and schools as well.
And these modules are available for dissemination to people who might want to undertake this kind of program, right?
Absolutely. We are looking to actually transfer that. So it's all about training of trainers. So it's about scaling up people within that system, or create an ecosystem within those organizations that would be able to support vulnerable people. And because NIMHANS is a very small place, we can't deliver to the entire country. But what we can do is hopefully help the rest of the country out. That system.
So that brings me to an important question. The extent to which these kind of training programs which focus on prevention and promotion actually address some of the emerging issues, and I'd like John to respond to this. For example, some of the stuff that is happening in the digital world with children, or with these academic training institutions and the enormous stress that children face, or this whole epidemic of self-cutting, the non-suicidal self-injury that Manjula alluded to. A quick comment on this, John?
With regards to some of the scenarios which Professor Seshadri had mentioned, first, if you look at the academic stress, we all understand that it has been tremendous over the past, I would say, about a decade or so. And mainly this is seen in the adolescent age group. And there's a particular phenomenon that also wherein many of the adolescents, right at the age of 13 or 14, they are taken up into these coaching centers for many of the competitive examinations that will happen usually at beyond the class 12 level. And they are put through tremendous academic stress. And this becomes a significant vulnerability for adolescents who already may have certain risk factors. And mainly in terms of addressing this particular population, liaison with the schools as well as this coaching centers is very important, and sensitizing the parents, the teachers, as well as the students themselves, and providing them the prevention at different levels, as we had alluded to earlier, wherein immediate response in the terms of crisis, and also providing them with the resource materials, and also the training to the teachers, primarily to identify these children who are going through emotional distress and helping them on a timely basis. Coming to the influence of media, we all know that these days, due to the availability of these smartphones and all these other gadgets very easily to children as young as 7-8 years, and from that age onwards, like into the adolescents, many of them becoming addicted to these kind of gadgets and spending long times in these gadgets, with exposure to different kinds of inappropriate content also. And sometimes with regards to the self-harm also, we see that there are very disturbing trends wherein the adolescents, they make the self-harm and then they post the selfie photos or the videos onto the social networking sites. And this may provoke the other youngsters to just follow this particular strategy rather than coping healthily with their problems. And it's very important because this is something, the access is there for all people. There's no means to ban that. So we will have to access in that route only and sensitize the people, spreading the awareness over the digital media.
Thank you, John. John referred to resource materials that are available to actually work with adolescents across a whole range of conditions. For those of you interested, do log into www.nimhanschildproject.org. This is a public domain, free access site with all workbooks and intervention material for those who work with children, particularly in schools and other childcare institutions can use. Now, we have spoken about a life, even stress-related context to suicide. What about depression? And Manjula, do take us through some of the premises of how, in the context of depression, some of these programs work.
Thank you, sir. So I'm going to talk about the two kinds of approaches that we have been using in order to address depression. The first is indicated interventions, wherein that we screen people with depression and then they are provided with intervention. So I would like to specifically talk about two such programs. One is that this is a program that we conducted in the schools. This is an 8-week program. It is called as a group intervention, group coping skills training for the adolescents who score above the cutoff, or they are called as subclinical, they have subclinical depression. So this program intervention was carried out in the school setup, and we found that this resulted in a reduction in the depressive symptoms, increase in coping, and then increase in social problem solving, and this program was well received. The second program is another program which is called as PushD. It is an app-based guided self-help program. This is developed in the Indian context. So this has various interactive components. This program also has been pilot tested, and then we have found that this resulted in decrease in suicide, the depressive symptoms, and then increase in the functioning as well as well-being. So this is a freely available app, and people can register and go through the component of this program. And there is a screening, like only if there is a person meets the cutoff, then you can go over the rest of the components. So
here is a very critical issue that Manjula is raising, which is that the window or the gateway to actually approach suicide prevention is through conflict resolution and coping strategies approach. You may not necessarily approach suicide directly, particularly when you look at preventive and promotive programs. In that context, I'll wind up this cycle by requesting Jaikumar, Prashanti, and Meena to look at, when you look at coping issues, and particularly in terms of training, whether it's the nursing profession or whether it's some work that Meena has been doing with the media or with the police work, Jay, that you referred to. How is this element of conflict resolution and coping strategy built into the capacity building work that you do, built into the media work that you do, built into the professional training that you do for nursing colleagues? Jay?
Thank you, sir. As I mentioned before, it was a cascading set of a model. The basic premises of this program started with the spurt of suicides gone up in Tamil Nadu police. Then they actually approached us actually to look into something. And we didn't know actually that time we are going to deal with the entire police force. Then later on actually it became too much for even us, stress for us also. So later on actually we had to sit and work through it in a multidisciplinary team. And we developed a 42 session program that is actually we delivered it through a TOT program for master trainers or well-being officers who are actually scrutinized and selected from different parts of the districts from the Force City Police. And they were actually deputed here to NIMHANS, and we developed a police well-being kit. And through this actually that every domain of their personal professional life is actually being addressed, how to address the issues on the day-to-day basis of their life. Could
you give us a flavor of this well-being kit, some of the content?
Some of the content is that, for example, even the communication pattern with the seniors and the juniors, and how to deal with, somebody who is in the stress, who are coming for some sort of help, where most of their stress is actually being transferred to the client or the people who actually seek for support. So that in turn actually puts a communication barrier between the police and the public. And even if their better work was actually not recognized.
This is so important and critical, because what Jay is pointing out is that failure of communication perhaps is a very central construct to the whole suicidal phenomena. Meena, any thoughts on this? Because communication, media related stuff, what is the kind of possibility we can have in our association with the media to really build this foundation of suicide prevention, based on conflict resolution, communication, and coping strategies?
Thank you, sir. I think media has a very important role when it comes to appropriate reporting of in preventing suicide and increasing public understanding. And they need to understand the impact that it has on the way they present suicide in the newspapers or in TV, not only on the people in community, but also people who have been bereaved from others, the family members who have committed suicide, or even people who have attempted. And they need to follow certain guidelines. So they need to familiarize themselves with the existing guidelines that are there holding in place. And all these guidelines have just not come out, but it come out just like that. But it is out of a very strong research base that these guidelines have come up, and they need to adhere to that. For example, the WHO has certain guidelines on how you need to report suicide. That is not tell very vivid details about how the person committed suicide, or they need to mandatorily have a helpline number that needs to be there when they end a story, and they need to actually the framing of story is very important here. That is, how they need to not put it as an entertainment story, but they need to address it as a health story here. That the media has to take it as a health story, and they need to understand that suicide invariably arises from any life events or stressful events, mental health disorders or mental health problems. So they need to be very sensitive and follow the guidelines on which it has to be based on.
Thank you very much for that. Prashanti, last words on NIMHANS's contribution to this very critical public health problem.
Yes, sir. At NIMHANS, we have been doing considerable work in this area. For example, being members of the NIMHANS Suicide Prevention Core Group, we have developed standardized modules and audits for ensuring inpatient safety, which is highly critical. And we have also been conducting educational and awareness-raising workshops regularly for patients and family members. And we have also been targeting important groups out there in the community through our work with schools and colleges, and that is school children and adolescents. And one aspect I would like to highlight is that we have served as important members in the expert committees. One such committee was the National Emergency Life Support for Nurses, an initiative by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. And I would like to also highlight that one specific group that we work with is those who use addictive substances, in view of the increasing use of substances in the country, and substance use being increasingly recognized as a major risk factor for suicide, for completed suicides. Working with these individuals, not only with these individuals, but populations impacted by a substance abuser in the family, for example, children, spouses. This is a regular part of the work that we do.
Well, thank you very much to the panel to basically raise the foundation of